They were painted as powerless, fragile flowers trapped in a man's world, draped in lace, perched in parlors, immortalized in oil portraits as if untouched by sin. But behind the polished doors of plantations, some white women carried their own dirty rings of power, secret systems of control, cruelty, and obsession over enslaved black men and women. A hidden history dripping with filthy lies and unspeakable acts. A rusted iron key turns slowly in a lock. The screen fades to black. What if the most disturbing secrets of slavery weren't written in laws, but whispered in locked bedrooms and hidden gardens? What if the so-called guardians of purity, the delicate mistresses of the South, were hiding dirty truths that could break your heart? To uncover this truth, we must enter the secret world white women never wanted history to expose. The 18th and 19th centuries, the American South and the Caribbean, where sprawling plantations rose like monuments to wealth and cruelty. Mansions gleamed with chandeliers and polished floors, gardens bloomed with roses and magnolias. But beneath this beauty lay the stench of blood and sweat. Every brick, every stair, every embroidered curtain was built on the backs of enslaved black men and women. Society declared white women the moral guardians of this world, protectors of family honor, delicate, innocent, powerless. But this was a myth. Behind closed doors, many wielded terrifying authority. The plantation house was more than a home. It was a theater of cruelty, a place where polished luxury disguised dirty secrets. Imagine walking barefoot across its polished floors, each board carrying the echo of footsteps, the whispers of punishments, the shadows of unspeakable acts. To understand these dirty rings of power, we must first see how the system itself handed white women silent weapons. Inside the household, mistresses ruled with suffocating precision. They oversaw enslaved cooks, maids, and attendants, deciding who lived in the main house, who ate scraps in the kitchen, who was punished for the smallest mistake. Enslaved men often served as butlers, drivers, and stable hands, placed in constant proximity to their mistresses, yet trapped under constant suspicion. Black women endured the cruelest intimacy, forced to nurse white children, to stitch gowns, to wash delicate linens, to endure the daily orders of mistresses who saw them not as women but as property. Their very bodies were pressed into service, breasts offered to feed another's child, hands blistered by endless labor, skin scarred by punishment. The mistress controlled discipline inside the house. She decided whose back felt the lash, whose body was locked in darkness, whose labor was doubled out of spite. She could starve a woman out of jealousy. She could send a man to the fields out of suspicion. She could decide with a whisper whether someone lived in torment or in shallow survival. This was more than labor. It was psychological warfare. White women, frustrated by their own lack of power in a patriarchal world, redirected that frustration onto those they could control. Enslaved men and women. The plantation house became a battlefield of silence, where every gesture carried weight and every mistake could be turned into punishment. And in this twisted system, disturbing private games of power began to unfold. Behind lace curtains and candlelit halls, the dirty rings of power turned darker still. What happened in these private chambers was rarely spoken aloud, yet its stench lingers in the silence of history. Some mistresses invented punishments meant not only to wound, but to humiliate. Enslaved women forced to wear degrading clothes, their hair hacked off in jealous rage, their beauty punished as a crime. They were ordered to kneel for hours, to scrub floors until skin split and bled, or to perform unspeakable tasks designed to break spirit as much as body. The cruelty was not just physical, it was psychological, a constant reminder of absolute subjugation. But humiliation was not enough for some. There were disturbing desires that crept into the shadows. Whispers tell of white mistresses secretly pursuing enslaved men, turning human beings into objects of obsession. Their every glance twisted into temptation, their every refusal turned into a dangerous risk. For the enslaved man, there was no such thing as consent. Refusal meant lashes. Silence meant survival. Submission was demanded, not given. In public, these women were draped in innocence, framed as the paragons of white purity. But in private, they enacted fantasies that shattered the very myths they embodied. They played delicate saints in daylight and dirty tyrants in the dark. The hypocrisy was filthy, soaked into every curtain, every diary page, every broken silence. Jealousy burned like fire. Enslaved women bore the brunt of it, punished not only for their own existence, but for the sins of white men who abused them. A mistress might scar a young girl simply because her husband's eyes lingered too long, or she might order brutal punishments on a pregnant enslaved woman. Vengeance disguised as discipline. The pain was multiplied, shared by men and women alike, both trapped under the mistress's shifting moods. And then, the whispers grew stranger still. Some spoke of unspoken networks, dirty rings of complicity, mistresses confiding in one another about their dealings with enslaved men, about the private power they wielded behind their husbands' backs. It was a secret society of silence, hidden within tea parties and garden walks, a code of cruelty never meant to be recorded. These were not isolated stories. They were dirty rings of power, woven into the very fabric of slavery itself, a hidden system where innocence was a mask and cruelty an inheritance. But what did these secret acts do to the people forced to endure them? For enslaved women, the torment was endless, stripped of dignity, punished for their beauty, forced to serve the very families who despised them. Their motherhood twisted, babies sold away, their own milk taken to feed another's child, their bodies pressed into work that broke them bone by bone. For enslaved men, the torment was silent, robbed of masculinity, trapped in impossible positions, made to serve women who at times lusted after them and at other times sought to destroy them. They lived in constant fear that a whisper, a rumor, a false accusation could lead to the noose. Their every movement was watched, their every breath measured. Even strength became dangerous. Their very bodies were criminalized. This emotional torment cannot be overstated. Shame, fear, and silence were weapons as sharp as the whip. Survivors carried broken identities, living double lives, outwardly obedient, inwardly shattered. They endured because endurance was the only choice. But the cost was enormous. These scars became generational. The silence of enslaved men and women carried forward, passed down as unspoken trauma. Families grew with shadows in their roots, with stories that could never be told aloud. These were histories that would break your heart, because they reveal how deeply power can twist the human soul, how far cruelty will reach when it is cloaked in innocence. And yet, as with all secrets, fragments of truth eventually slipped through the cracks. Slave narratives offered glimpses of this hidden world. Harriet Jacobs described the jealous wrath of white mistresses, their cruelty toward enslaved women who caught the eye of their husbands. Frederick Douglass, too, hinted at the silent torments enslaved men endured. Their words were careful, measured, but beneath them lay disturbing truths too dangerous to write openly. Diaries, too, reveal what the world tried to forget. Letters filled with envy, rage, and obsession. Mistresses writing of punishments they ordered, of suspicions that haunted them, of anger that boiled against enslaved women. These were the private confessions of so-called delicate ladies, documents that destroy the myth of purity. Oral traditions carried what could not be written. Whispers passed down through families. Fragments of truth wrapped in caution. Stories of beatings, of disturbing punishments, of forced encounters no one dared to describe fully. Stories carried in song, in silence, in half-spoken warnings to the next generation. And then there were the courts. Rare cases where mistresses' acts were dragged into daylight. False accusations made against enslaved men to cover a mistress's secret desires. Cases where brutality against enslaved women was too shocking to ignore, though rarely punished. These cases are rare, but when they surfaced, they cracked the facade of innocence wide open. And in the modern day, the blood itself tells a story. DNA evidence has revealed hidden ancestries, white families, unknowingly carrying the genes of men and women their foremothers once controlled. The proof is written in bone and blood, in genetic chains that stretch across centuries. These exposures shocked communities, forced history to confront its dirtiest lies, because what was long painted as myth The fragility of white womanhood, the purity of their role, was exposed as a mask hiding cruelty, obsession, and complicity.